will have...
Indeed. Right, well, welcome everybody. It's very nice to be here, and I will, due to slight technical issues, I'm going to ask Sue for the first slide, please. Well, it sort of leads on a bit cheekily from what Anthony was just saying about the Polish community anglicising their name. As you see, the theme for the night tonight is places with Polish connections in Acton, Ealing and London. And my name is Dave Wootton, and I've Polishised it with the ski on the end. So I hope that hasn't offended anybody. But away we go. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Yes, I too have a slide of the POSC Centre in Hammersmith. It's somewhere where I cycle past every day when on my way to work, and I've called in there recently on a couple of occasions, and I've had the pleasure of going there with Joanna and her Ealing walking, talking and exploring groups, and maybe I'll refer to that later. Thank you. Next slide, please. Well, for me as a young lad who was brought up in Wembley, wherever we seemed to go on our little car journeys and holidays, we always passed the Polish War Memorial. We've already referred to it earlier. It's on the side of the Western Avenue. It actually has the River Brent in a the River Pin in a channel, canalized, if you like, running behind it or around it, and in the background we would see RAF Northolt. Next slide, please. I'm going to just hold 1 second because I'm going to go to my own presentation so that I can keep up with where we are. So the memorial, I'm going back a slide, Sue, if that's possible. The memorial to the Polish airmen fighting with the Allies in World War II was initiated by the Polish Air Force in 1948 in South Ruislip. And I'll refer to why RAF Northolt is called Northolt later on. It was unveiled in 1948. There's also a piece of sculpture, a fragment of the Battle of Britain Memorial on the Victoria Embankment, which I haven't got a picture for. Onto the map of Europe as it looked in the 1940s, we've had several references over our 3 talks in this Polish heritage series, but that was the situation in the 1940s. So you can see large amounts of Europe and North Africa, Syria, Norway were under Hitler's rule. Next slide, please. This is a slide that an interest I took in the POSC Centre. There's a shop front that's currently available for hire if anyone's interested. But I did notice a few panels being piled up in there 2 or 3 weeks ago. And much to my pleasure, I see them now assembled in that window of the shop front. So I've dropped into the Polish POSC Centre on a couple of occasions, and eventually, as it's technically closed during COVID, under COVID circumstances, only open for passport validation, I did actually persuade somebody to let me in and to take pictures and to examine these panels, which we shall see a little bit more in detail. Next. Okay. One panel particularly interested me because this the British created an anti-aircraft defence system known as the Dowding system, which gave them advance over the Germans during the Battle of Britain. The defence work included technology, fighter planes, guns, anti-aircraft floodlights and barrage balloons. There was also a chain of command enabling the flow of intelligence information about German air raids and the communication of orders. The reason I'm particularly interested in this, as you can see on the left, you can see an aerial. My father was involved in 1939, 1940 with the development of radar along the whole of the south coast and the east coast of Britain. And I can remember him telling me various stories about what the locals thought about this in Dorset, in Swanage, so that we could see the Luftwaffe coming over the North Sea and over the English Channel, and we were able to set our fighter pilots off from places like RAF Northolt to intercept the aircraft. So we had that, and in the middle picture I think we have the table with all the activity and movements being masked. My father, having left the radar establishment in Swanage when it then moved to Malvern for security reasons, then spent his time working at EMI in Hayes. And I remember that many of his colleagues were Eastern European, Polish scientists who came to join him. So that all went on for quite a while in developing microwave and ultrasound and body scanner technology. Next slide, please. Well, this is a picture not actually of me, but one of my activities that I did at school. I was lucky enough to go to a school that had an Air Cadets, and I think at about 1966 we did have the opportunity to actually have a flight in an aircraft, and we used to go to RAF White Waltham, but on this occasion we had a much closer to home. I was at school in Harrow. We had the opportunity to go to RAF Hendon. Couldn't go there now because it's a housing estate, but at that point there was a runway, and you can see some lorries in the background there, which provided winch aircraft or winch gliders into the sky above the side of what is now the M1 and the main line out of King's Cross, I believe. So this is a tandem glider. I can give you its name if anyone's interested. It was a Slingsby T21, and I remember climbing into this pilot. I'd spent most of the day going to collect the other pilots, other gliders. You can see one in the background with its wing tipped to the side. So eagerly, having earned my flight, having wheeled this glider back into its start position, as my name is Wootton, I'm of course always faced with being the last person in the on the list. So I got into this glider only to be sort of greeted and introduced to a Second World War Polish pilot who was sort of volunteering to take all these horrible smelly little school children up in the plane on their first flight. So in I went, and he said to me, well, this is the last flight of the day, so I think we want to get this over and done with fairly quickly. At that point, he put it into a steep dive, and there was an express train going along the railway track, which goes along the perimeter of RAF Hendon, and we sort of, I'm going to say, dive bombed this plane. I remember it distinctly because I ended up with some kind of pressure explosion in the back of my head, giving me a headache for several weeks afterwards. He then said, well, we don't want to wheel this thing back into the hangar, so I'm going to fly it into the hangar. Next slide, please. And that's where the doors were open, and much to my horror, it wasn't quite as you see it now, but this is the hangar, and we flew straight in that. I was quite petrified at the time, and this Polish pilot calmly, landed it in the middle of the hangar, and we got out and carried on with on our way. The hangars are particularly interesting as they are the oldest wooden aircraft hangars in the world. I took an interest in these because I later found out that I was related to one of the original people who formed the Royal Flying Corps before the RAF. So it's always been an interesting experience for me. So that's now the RAF Museum, which I think probably has opened in the last few days for visitors, and well worth a visit. Next slide, please. During the Second World War, I was aware that there were two squadrons. One was Flight 302, that was based in Lincolnshire to look after the North Sea. And here we see a Spitfire of Flight 303, which was based at RAF Northolt. Just a little fill in here. RAF stations are named by the nearest, and RAF stations are based, and their name is taken from the nearest station, which when RAF Northolt existed was Northolt. Really, it should now be called RAF South Ruislip. But there we have one of the Northolt 303 squadron planes, and I believe the Borough of Willesden actually funded the purchase of one of the aircraft that formed the Polish squadron. Next slide, please. Now, you might wonder why I put a picture of Mount Everest, Lhotse and Lhotse there, but in my wisdom at one point, I decided with a friend of mine that we would hitchhike to Mount Everest. We were both training to be teachers, and there was a glut of children to be taught, so the teaching jobs were quite plentiful. So we thought, well, we'd rather start teaching. We'd hitchhike to Everest, which we did. And there you can see in the foreground some tents at Everest Base Camp. We then heard that it was possible then to go to the other end of Nepal. So we returned to the little airstrip that was built by Sir Edmund Hillary to hopefully get a flight back to Kathmandu, and so we could go to Annapurna. The reason I put this in there is because we had to wait for 3 days for this plane to arrive. It was a Twin Otter plane, and much to our amazement, as this plane came up the grass runway, out stepped 20 or so Polish mountaineers who were on their way to attempt to the ascent of Lukla, the mountain to the left or right of Everest itself. I think I put the height there, 5,400 meter summit. As they got out of the plane, we were acclimatized, they weren't, and the first thing they did was just lie on the ground and gasp for air. But anyway, it was an interesting experience, and the quote that you can see on the slide there is from the Alpine magazine, and I think they later went on to conquer to successfully. Oh, they weren't successful on this particular climb, but did manage Everest and also trips to the South Pole. Next slide, please. Well, my interest in Poland continued when in February 2014, we decided to take our youngest son, Greg, off to Poland for a holiday and a ski trip. I obviously went off and got myself a Lonely Planet book, and there you can see a book about the Tatra Mountains. So we thought we were well equipped for the event, and there's my passport, which I managed to find with the February 2004 event. Obviously, it was a very interesting time to go because we went to Krakow, and I wish I'd spent more time there. But anyway, we then jumped on a bus and went to Zakopane. Unfortunately, the snow was a bit disappointing that year, but never mind. We had some lovely walks in the mountains. It was great to spend some time with Polish people in their own country, and to talk about the future, and obviously 3 months from when Poland would join the EU. Next slide, please. Since joining the EU, we've obviously seen some quite interesting statistics. A new generation of Poles came to Britain from May 2004. And you can read from yourself from that slide that as of 2020, there were around 815,000 Polish nationals living in the United Kingdom. Between 2008 and 2019, the Polish population in the United Kingdom more than doubled, reaching a peak of more than 1 million in 2017. We've obviously seen the vote for us to leave the EU in 2016, and there's been a decline in Poles remaining in Britain, and I think probably the next slide was got a bit more text about that. This is something that I found. The Polish immigrants that arrived after 2014 were different from those that we had come to Britain in the past. The very house that I'm delivering this from now was owned by the Gakowska family. The mother was a croupier in a nightclub, and the father worked at the Walls ice cream factory at the top of the road at Friary, what is the rapidly disappearing Friary Park social housing area by Acton mainline station. So this area in 1985, which was when we moved here, had a high Polish population. It's changed somewhat since then. Reading on, most of the Poles never made the desperate decision to renounce their country. They joining the EU along with the other citizens from 7 other formerly communist states. They came for a while to find jobs and earn money at a time when 1 in 5 Poles were unemployed in their own country. In all, around 1 million Poles moved to the UK over the next 13 years, more than from all the other communist states. Many Poles in Britain, when asked about this, they can see that refers to something else in this document. A controversial Home Office report commissioned under Tony Blair's government had estimated the migration would be between 5,000 and 13,000 a year from all the new member states put together. In reality, in some years, the number of Poles alone reached 90,000 who came to Britain. One has to question, we'll have a section on questions, and it's a discussion topic. Things have changed in the last 2 years, the exchange rates, and I too have seen now quite a few of my Polish friends and acquaintances returning to Poland. Next slide, please. Retail here, I've just got some shots of some of the businesses that have sprung up in and around Acton. In these 2 cases, we have a Horn Lane restaurant by Acton mainline station. On the right, the Sparrow Cafe, and I know Joanna has told me about the importance of the Sparrow to the Polish. Maybe she'd like to contribute to that later. Sadly, this one has closed. COVID hasn't done the high street, as we know, any good. And quite a lot of shops do not look as though they're going to reopen. Next slide, please. This is just an emphasis on some shops that are no longer with us. One on Horn Lane on the right, and one just down the road from the Polsk Centre in Hammersmith. Next slide, please. A couple of shops, and perhaps the next slide, please. This probably is my favourite shop. I was due to be joined by a Polish colleague of mine, Derek, who's been in the UK for more than a decade. And supplies from the shop made planning for this event a pleasure. Unfortunately, Derek was unable to join me this evening for a Q&A style session. Let's move on, please. I've been involved with education in and around Ealing for the last 40 plus years. I'm a Duke of Edinburgh Award assessor, and I go into many schools in and around Ealing, both state schools and independent schools. In fact, 2 weeks' time, I shall be going away with St Benedict's School, where again I meet quite a lot of Polish students make up that population of that school. I came across the St Breville's Polish Scout House by accident while on one of these events, assessing students on their Duke of Edinburgh Award. As you can see here, we've got a historical picture of people outside the house and a more recent picture at the house built, or the centre, which is on the Welsh borders by St Breville's, which is an ancient castle site on the River Wye. I also know that it's used by Featherstone High School for where they have their regular school camps, so it's open to other people, but it's obviously a great centre for many Poles to go and visit in their summer camps. Next slide, please. It's already been referred to. Here we have the fact that the Polsk Centre is an approved exam centre to provide heritage language testing of the students who attend many of the Saturday schools. The school I worked in was made itself hired out to for Polish events, the big religious days, and in fact only today I did find myself down at the Acton Catholic Church, the Lady of Our Lords, where there was a huge queue of people waiting to get in, socially distanced, etc. Many children were there because I think Polish children from, or members of the congregation, their children came from all over Ealing because they were having a concert there as well. So a big event as it today is Pentecost. So finally, that picture on the right is a picture of Windsor Road, where the disused Methodist Church, which was bought by the Polish to become their community church. And I've got some pictures there of some engravings in the stone. I don't know if that's related to the church or not. Perhaps someone could help me out on that one. Next slide, please. Well, we'll have a question and answer session, so perhaps we'll save that to the end, but I would like to, next slide, please. I would like to say a big thank you to Ella from the Polish Education Society for helping out with the first three, and to Acton History Group with David and Amanda Knights, and for Sue for hosting tonight's Zoom lesson. Thank you very much. And of course, yes, and of course, Joanna and Tony, how can I forget my last slide? To both of you for taking on this huge task, and I really do think we talked about it, but it's been very engaging. All 4 sessions, 4th being tonight, and I know that we had a very short timeline for everybody. From about mid-April, when we've got given the go-ahead with the sponsorship and the making the film, or films and everything else. So to me, I'd like to say congratulations to you both, because I know it's been a huge amount of work. So well done.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks, you, David. And thank you for putting so much hard work to prepare it. Yeah. So we wouldn't make it without everybody else chipping in.